Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm Catherine from the Sewing Studio at Lady Lake and the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore. Thank you so much for jumping on board. I have some tips for you this morning. Every now and again, a person makes a mistake. Yes, that's right. We all make mistakes. And thank God in heaven, He gave us the seam ripper. And the seam ripper is a very helpful tool for getting rid of mistakes. If you make a mistake, rip it out and do it again. That's one of the things I've always loved about doing costumes in the theater or anything that I started to do after that. Make a mistake, rip it out, do it again. That's just life. You do it again, make it perfect the second time. Okay, so I want to talk to you about what's even harder than just a normal seam is a serged seam. And how do you get rid of that? Because there's a lot more threads in a serge seam than there is in a regular seam. Okay, so let's talk about what a serge seam is. So when you have a serger, you've got your loopers, your upper looper and your lower looper, and then you have your two needle threads. Okay, so you have typically with a 4-thread overlock serge seams, you've got the 4 seams. Your left needle, your right needle, your upper looper, and then underneath you've got your lower looper. Okay, so in order to get rid of it, you need to start by ripping out your right needle thread. Rip or cut your right needle thread. All right, so if you get your handy dandy seam ripper, and this is one of my favorite because it has this little rubberized tip to it, so it helps that, it has a bit of a grab to it, which helps like remove all the extra little schlubbies as you do along your work. Okay, so let's look at this first piece here. So I'm going to start by taking my seam ripper and I'm going to insert it where I can release that right needle thread a little bit along my way. Okay, so once I've released that right needle thread, I'm going to take it and I'm going to just pull that out. So there I've got my right needle thread out of the way, which leaves me with my left needle thread. Okay, so I will take my seam ripper and I will grab a hold of one of my little left needle threads and then release it from the fabric. So there's my left needle thread, that purple one. And again, I'm going to lay it down and I will just release it by grabbing a hold of it and pulling that thread out. There goes my left needle thread. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm left with my loopers, my upper looper and my lower looper. And it looks like there's something holding them in there, but because they've been held on by your needle threads, they're kind of like in your fabric, but they're not attached to it by anything. So at that point, all you have to do is grab a hold of your looper threads, and once you have your looper threads, they just pull right out. It's it's one of those oddly satisfying videos. Up front, Mr. Eric. It's one of those oddly satisfying moments because it's like, whoop, they just all come running right out, which is pretty amazing. So there's a couple of different things that I want to talk about, is that in terms of seam rippers, of course you have your regular seam ripper. So your regular seam ripper is engineered with the inside of the seam ripper right here is where you're going to cut on the inside part, and then you have your outside of your seam ripper, which does not have a sharp edge. So when you go to rip out your threads, if you can't get it really easily depending on your fabric, then you can take that hard side of your seam ripper and just kind of gently work your one thread out. Once you've worked your one thread out, you can grab a hold of it again along the way and do a little bit of ripping along the way. So if you do it that way, then you have individual sections that you end up pulling out a thread from, as opposed to a whole long strip. So it really just depends on your fabric and which one is going to be easier, where you can grab an individual section and remove that one little individual section, or whether you're removing the whole thing. And again, at the end, you're just going to grab a hold of your looper threads and release them right out of your piece. It's so cool. Okay, now they've also engineered a seam ripper that is for serge seams. Ruffle makes it, and there's a few other companies out there, but we carry the Ruffle. It almost looks like a scalpel. So the way that you use this particular seam ripper is that instead of grabbing a hold of your needle threads, you actually can run this ripper into your looper threads. So you get a few of your looper threads on your little scalpel, and you basically just rip those right out. Now, when you release your seams this way, your serger seams this way, that's where you have a whole lot of pick it out, pick it out, pick it out afterwards stuff that you end up having to deal with to get rid of all the extra little schlubbies. So when you cut your loopers, this is another way to do it. It's actually very helpful if you have a hard time figuring out which one is your needle thread and which one is your looper thread. So if you end up using this seam ripper to cut your loopers out, you end up having to pick off a lot more schlubbies, and that's where, again, a rubberized tip at the end, you would lay it down and just schlub it, rub it off, and get rid of it. Okay, so I just want to show this from overhead real quickly. So again, you start off with your 2 threads. You're going to cut your right needle thread so that you can remove your right needle thread from your project. You're left with your left needle. So now you have to deal with your left needle. So you would cut your left needle thread along the way, and once you've done that, you remove your left needle, which leaves you with just your loopers, which you grab a hold of and release because there's nothing left. So that's how you remove your serge seams. Now, I also want to show you, because it's actually quite easy a technique right after that to show, is a quick way to gather. So instead of removing your needle threads, you're pulling your needle threads in order to condense your fabric into an area space that you need for a ruffle or something like that. So when you do it that way, you're going to start by taking one end of your piece and tie yourself a little knot. I just do one little loop around and I keep it close to the edge, and I pull my knot so that my knot is right down close to the edge of that particular seam. Okay, now I go to the other side. When I'm on the other side, I'm going to take my seam ripper on the non-cutty side, and I will try and grab a hold of and then pinch so that I can release my 2 needle threads from my back looper threads. So you see I have my 4 separate threads all removed apart from each other. Now once you've done that, you can take a hold of your 2 needle threads and very easily just start to gather your piece, okay? So now I can create this super easy little ruffle, little gather, just by grabbing those 2 needle threads and pulling them so that I can create my little ruffle. Once you've done that, you can work your ruffle down so that you can evenly disperse it a little bit, or whatever you need to make your ruffle fit a particular distance. So when you're gathering, you're going to knot one end. After you've knot one end, you're going to release your needle threads. So that's right here. You're basically lifting your needle threads up out of your loopers. Instead of being attached under it, you're lifting it to where you can grab a hold of the ends of your 2 needle threads. Once you've done that, you pull them until your fabric gets into the desired distance. Okay? So that's really it for today. Thank you so much for taking some time with me. Please remember to like this video, comment on if you have anything you'd like us to talk about in the future. We have a blog on our website, sewing.net. We also have a Facebook page, Sewing Studio at Lady Lake, or the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore, and we also have a YouTube page. So if you go to the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore on YouTube, you can access these videos at any point in time. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.